Norway and North Korea are countries that may seem very different. That's because of this. They have totally different cultures, languages, and costumes, and are separated by thousands of kilometers of surface area. But they have one thing in common. They both border Russia. So Russia is a massive country. Its surface area is identical to the entire surface area of Pluto. Of course, Russia shares borders with a lot of countries, around 14 land borders, plus 2 if you count these partially recognized countries as well. Oops, controversy. But anyways, some of these countries can be very distant and can have completely different cultures. One of the furthest you can get is from Norway to North Korea. But how? How did even Russia become so big that it bordered these two extremely distant countries? The answer lies in the geography and history of these countries. But before that, let's look at how their borders look like. So the Norway-Russia border looks like this, and this on the map. It consists of a 195.7 kilometer land border between Sør-Varanger, Norway, and Pechenegski district, Russia. As you can see, it's mostly just tundra, and that's because it lies in the extreme north of the Arctic Circle. Meanwhile, in the North Korea-Russia border, it looks like this, and this on the map. It consists of 18 kilometers of terrestrial border, the shortest of Russia's international borders. The North Korea-Russia border runs along the middle of the Taman River. While these borders are standard now, the important thing why Russia managed to border these countries is traced back in history. To achieve these borders, it's obviously asked, how did Russia manage to get really big? Long story short, the lands belonging to the Rus, which was mostly just Western Russia and perhaps Ukraine, was constantly raided by nomadic warriors, with most notably Mongols. And Russia thought of expanding east to suppress and put an end to these raids. And of course, more prestige. They did get east and they realized that there's so much land in the northeast called Siberia, which is sparsely populated and lack an advanced civilization due to its climate. Russia conquered it, reaching the Pacific Ocean. That's how Russia got really big. Now let's look at how Russia managed to border these two nations. When it comes to Norway, there's a long history of negotiations. To oversimplify, Norwegians settled what is now known as Finnmark, which borders the Novgorod Republic. Novgorod then became part of the Russian Tsardom. Then various Russian and Norwegian, sometimes Norwegian Danish or Norwegian Swedish leaders tried to claim adjacent territory, but the border remains unclear and not demarcated. Then, in 1825, a common Norwegian and Russian commission was established to draw a borderline, resulting in a report and a map which was approved by both countries' authorities, in which the treaty was signed the next year in St. Petersburg. The border remains Norway's youngest unchanged border and Russia's oldest. And to the other side of Russia, into Korea. North Korea technically didn't exist back then, but as a unified Korean kingdom under Joseon dynasty. Back then, it was a tributary of China's Qing dynasty. Under the Convention of Peking in November 1860, the Qing dynasty ceded territories east of the Ussuri River to the Russians, which established the Russo-Korean border, though there was no mention of Korea as a separate country in that convention. So technically, Russia has been bordering Norway and Korea, although tributary to China, back in the 19th century. There are obviously many changes that happened between that point and today. In 1910, Korea was annexed by Japan, inheriting the border with Russia along the Tumen River. During the Russian Revolution and eventually the rise of the USSR, a region called Petsamo, which borders Norway, was ceded to Finland from the USSR, which means Russia, now the USSR, no longer borders Norway, and that seems to stay that way. But fun fact, niet. During World War II, Finland tried to push further into the USSR along with German-occupied Norway, but the USSR struck back, they won, rigging the Petsamo region, and it now borders Norway again. Meanwhile, in the east, Japanese also didn't have a fun time being nuked, and the USSR eventually occupied the northern portion of Korea, while the US occupied the south. The plan was to reunify, but didn't happen because Cold War, yada yada, North Korea, Commie South Korea, anti-Commie, Korean War, stalemate. Cold War rages on, Norway joins NATO, becoming the only one along with Turkey to actually border the USSR, which makes USSR nervous. It never got heated. In fact, this border is only one of Russia's borders where an open war between two bordering countries has not taken place, if it didn't count World War II. Meanwhile, in North Korea, the border was finalized. They signed an agreement establishing a border along the middle of the Tumen in 1985. There's one crossing of the North Korea-Russia border, the Friendship Bridge over the Tumen River, which is mostly just used for railroad transport. Then the Cold War ended and the USSR was dissolved. The borders were kept though. That's because both Norwegian and North Korean borders were part of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, and Russia inherited the borders, so here we are today. And that's how Russia managed to border these two countries at the same time until today. Let's look at another perspective. Take the Russian cities of Murmansk, around 110 kilometers away from the Norwegian border, and Vladivostok, around 128 kilometers away from the North Korean border. The distance from Murmansk to Vladivostok is roughly around 5,900 kilometers on a straight line, yet they're just as Russian as any other major city, as you're still in Russia technically. And if you adjusted it from Norway to North Korea, as in you enter their borders, it will be extremely different. This is just a demonstration of how big Russia really is. It is likely that Russia will continue to border North Korea and Norway at the same time in the future, as it has been for decades now. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more country neighbors.